Hello my lovelies, the candles are lit and I'm going to be spending this cold grey January day doing some cosy sewing in my studio, and I hope you'll join me. I've started keeping a sewing planner so that I can document my makes, and today I'll be making the Butterick reproduction dress from 1946, the B5281. I'm loving working in my planner, part sketchbook, part journal, and I know I'll enjoy looking back on my creative journey someday. I've gathered together all my fabrics and notions and I can't wait to get started. Having made this dress before several times, I can say that it's a very involved process cutting out. So it does have very detailed cutting plans on the instructions. I don't know why, I just never really like these. I just tend to make up my own. So how I do this is because you've got certain pieces that you're cutting out twice. So I put those together with the fabric. And then you've got these asymmetric pieces. So on the drawing, you're only cutting out one of each of these and one of these. So, and then one of this little panel. Unlike the sleeves, you're cutting two and they're mirrored. So I've got those pieces there. And then over here, hopefully not making you dizzy, I have the lining that I'm going to line the dress with, and the pieces that are going to be needed to cut the lining, because the bodice is different. Lining is very different. I'll show you. So your outer fabric, it's got the pleats here, or tucks, whatever you want to call them. It's got gathering here, which gives the shaping for the bodice, whereas the lining's got some darts and no tucks. But you do need to be careful because some of the pieces are cut on fold. And what I would say to be really aware of are the pieces that are going to be cut just once. You know, the temptation is to save on fabric and fiddle about with the pattern, and you know, you can sort of, you know, change pattern pieces around. Maybe if you put that face down that way and that piece face up and so on, you can save on your fabric. But that's a no, do not do that with this pattern, because these pieces have to sit in a particular way for it to work. Otherwise you won't even be able to sew your dress together. So here I am cutting out very quickly indeed, thanks to the wonder of modern technology. It's really important to transfer all markings as accurately as possible, especially on an asymmetric pattern, and I'm using good old-fashioned tailor tacks. And after this, I cut out all the rest of the pieces and I'm ready to start sewing. The first thing I need to do with the sewing is to put these shoulder darts in, or pleats, tucks, and when I sew, to do this little gathered panel at the side. Once I've pinned all the darts, etc., I lay the pattern pieces out in the correct position so I can check everything is okay before I start sewing. I tend to always do this these days, as I can spot mistakes before I make them. I sew in the darts and the shoulder pleats and then tie off the ends of the darts to avoid those pointy dart situations, and then I gather the side seam between the notches. Petting a very inconveniently placed missy is essential. A quick update: I've sewn the bodice, I've also sewn the main skirt panels together, and I can't remember how I did this last time, because I'm doing this differently to how the instructions are, step-by-step instructions are telling me to do this. I've sort of got to try to remember, because the next bit is to put the sleeves in. But because there is a cattail there, excuse me, Missy, because this bit needs to be sewn before I put that sleeve in, but then for this to be sewn, the neckline all needs to be sewn, because this goes into here. Now the actual dress has poppers, and you do this up over the top, but I actually want to sandwich this in between the lining and the outer fabric. So it's a little bit of a Sudoku moment for me. I shall report back when I have solved it. I've sewn with right sides together of the lining and the outer of the bodice. I've sewn all the way around the neckline, but I've left this bit open so that when this is all turned through, this can be sandwiched inside, and then I'll just slip stitch that close. I just need to snip here, and then I'll be able to turn the whole thing through, and I'll show you then. I've turned the bodice through and I've given it a press to get nice crisp edges. So this is open, so that's been left open, and I've got to get this panel into the lining, and actually you can see it. Initially I pinned just the outer layer to this outer layer at the seam allowance, which is 1.5, and that didn't work, because what you need is for this to lay flat like this. This isn't going to lay totally flat because it's got this shaping created by these tucks. So I'm just gonna move that out the way, pop that in, and make sure that lays flat, and then get that in there like that, because this neckline is supposed to be fairly squared off. My head does fit through there, but you can see it's a little bit of an angle, but I think that's fine. So I'm going to sew that in there. I'm going to sew both layers, actually, the lining layer and, where am I? Yeah, I am. And then I'm going to use the bodice lining to then cover the seam inside there. It will make sense when I show you, I hope. Otherwise, I've just got this completely wrong. The instructions tell you, step 28, to reinforce here before you then pin in and sew the panel. But because I'm doing a French seam here, what I need to do is ever so slightly different. Once you've pinned along to the tailor's tack, you're then going to sew all the way along to that tailor's tack, and then you're going to snip down to that point, pivot the skirt panels and sew down to the hem, making sure your seam is correctly lined up. I'm doing this in two parts because it's easier. I'm sewing first to the tailor's tack, removing it from the machine, snipping into the point, then pivoting. Then I pin the next part of the seam and sew all the way down. Because I've gone off-pieced and I'm constructing this seam as a French seam, I'm pressing the seam in place before pinning and sewing it. I've sewn in the front panel, asymmetric panel. I mean, because this fabric's so busy, the print's a ditzy print and all over, which is actually, quite it's quite good at disguising things, because there is a teeny tiny tuck at this point. I don't know why there's a tuck on this one. I've done this before on the blue dress that I showed you just before Christmas, and it didn't happen. But anyway, you can't really see it. Now, if this was for somebody else, I would take this apart and, carry on until it was absolutely perfect, but because it's for me and because you can't really see it, I'm making an executive decision to just let it be. It may or may not really annoy me at some future point. Hopefully I'll just sort of forget that it's there. Taking out the tailor tacks, and the front skirt is now ready to sew to the back skirt panel. I have sewn the skirt onto the bodice, and I have tacked the armhole lining in. Done that on both sides. Now, normally I sew in the sleeves flat rather than in the round, but just because of all of this, it's just, you know, complicated. So I just, to make life easier, whether it's easier to sew the sleeves in the round is another matter, but just to make life easier, I'm going to sew the sleeve seams and then pin them in and sew those in. And then I have this side seam to French seam, leave that open, and then I'm going to put the zip in. I've tacked the seam closed where the zip is to be positioned. Then I'll pin the zip in place, tack it down, and then sew it on the machine. It sounds like a complete faff, but it's how Dior construct their centre lap zippers, so who am I to argue? And here's the finished centre lap zip in all its glory. With right sides together, I've pinned the sleeve lining to the sleeve at the cuff, which I'll then sew. Once the lining is turned through to the inside, I'll slip stitch it in place all the way round the armhole, enclosing and neatening the armhole seams. You know, sometimes it feels like I'm being watched. The last few steps are to slip stitch all the bodice lining in place and then hem the dress. I used a rolled hem foot on the sewing machine rather than a hand rolled hem, but I think I actually prefer hemming by hand. I fell in love with the idea of embroidering my own buttons after I saw examples of Victorian ones in the Met Museum's online archive, well worth a visit. I matched the threads to the print of the dress and spent a lovely afternoon embroidering flowers using a mixture of chain stitch and French knots onto black silk. I embroidered these buttons, so I've got 2 of these. So these will go, it's the first time I've seen them actually with the dress. I'm really pleased, I think they're really pretty. And here they are, all finished and sewn into place. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I hope I see you again soon.